Hey everybody, Holly here, one of the conscious agents with Reality Sandwich. And we're kicking off another Share Your Experience episode today with my new friend Alex, who I connected with through our Reality Sandwich universe. And Alex reached out wanting to share some super powerful stories today about psychedelics, integration, and healing trauma. So thank you so much for being here, Alex. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Holly. Super excited to be here. But in terms of my story, so I just wrote a book called Trauma and Ecstasy, How Psychedelics Made My Life Worth Living, about sort of how I use MDMA therapy and psilocybin therapy to overcome childhood sexual abuse. And so what has kind of started my journey is I was 23 and on a bike ride around the Netherlands. And when I got off the bike, I started having really difficult pelvic floor problems, which is really not a place you want to be having trouble. So it was almost like a clenched fist in my pelvis, like it almost tightened up. And I wasn't really sure. I had really no idea what was going on at the time. I was very befuddled and sort of over time pretty panicked because I started having trouble going to the bathroom. I started having trouble with erectile function, and it just felt like a constant clenching, like tension. And, I was waking up every night to go to the bathroom every couple hours, every time. So I started seeing all these doctors and pelvic floor physical therapists. The doctors were kind of unsure about what was going on. They were pretty judgmental about it. Saw a lot of urologists. It really didn't go very well. Took a very Western approach to healing at the beginning. And so, they would go in there and, they clearly could tell something was wrong, but they had no idea what to do. And it's like, what do you think is wrong with you? And unfortunately, we tried some pretty invasive stuff. I did a Botox injection down there. Which was not pleasant, not something I would recommend.
Yeah, no.
And so they gloved down there a lot. There was even one doctor that wanted to do some sort of surgical procedure, which I'm obviously very happy didn't happen. But yeah, it was very tough. So this went on for several years, and I was truly totally unsure. And so I saw a pelvic floor physical therapist as well, with the idea that going in there could kind of calm the muscles down, so to speak, and that wasn't working either. I saw a bunch of acupuncturists. So over the next, 3.5, 4 years, I saw 20 doctors around the country. I saw 12 pelvic floor therapists, 6 acupuncturists, all sorts of crazy stuff. I even got a back scratcher device to insert down there myself to kind of try to calm down everything myself. And nothing was working. At the same time, I had heard about MDMA therapy from people like Tim Ferriss, who talked about his own experience with childhood sexual abuse. At the time, I was very triggered by sort of listening to that, but I didn't make any sort of connection there. I was very ignorant about the mind-body connection and just the idea that trauma could have these sort of physical components. And so one thing the doctors did say was we talked a lot about stress and anxiety. So I went to see a bunch of talk therapists, and we would talk about it, but really nothing was making progress. And the doctors, I tried to do meditation. I tried to journal. I tried to, read deep philosophical books. I tried to, swim, relax, sauna, vacation, all this stuff. And it just was not working. So eventually I decided to try MDMA therapy because I was anxious, or so I told myself. And it became clear after a couple sessions of pretty intense stuff that unfortunately I'd been badly sexually abused by a teacher when I was quite young. And that was sort of the root cause of all the pelvic issues I've been experiencing. And, in that session, when it really came up, I felt like I was being re-traumatized. I felt like it was happening all over again. I felt stuff, in my pelvis from the events. I felt those taste memory, muscle memory, and it was a very unpleasant day. But I think once I started bringing that up to the surface, that abuse is how I was able to start healing from that with things like, energy work and breath work. The psychedelics
I have
themselves.
a quick
Yeah,
question.
sorry.
Okay, no, I
Sure.
have a quick question. So this trauma that you experienced, which I'm so sorry that happened to you, and I'm so happy you found the right ways to move through this for yourself. But this was not something you had previously remembered. So you're on this healing journey. You're literally traveling across the globe, but you don't really know what you're treating at this point because this was a repressed memory.
Yeah, I really had no idea. I knew something was wrong down there, but really just it
So it
just
was
didn't
like
click at all.
in the MDMA experience, you had memories come back to you.
Yeah. So once
Okay.
I started doing MDMA, initially I had some suspicions about this individual.
Mhm.
Things were coming back around to him. After the second time I did MDMA, I thought this might have happened, but I sort of decided it didn't. He was still out of school and is still out of school now. So that sort of threw me off as well. There's like a photo of him and his partner like hanging out with their dogs. Particularly once I saw that, I sort of decided that I was kind of not, making this up, sort of.
Right.
But it kept coming back. And after the fourth session, the shaman I was working with at the time was like, "So, what do you think happened to your pelvis? You're actually not supposed to ask questions during an MDMA session of the patient, but it's generally, but she asked anyway." And it sort of came up. I was like, I was sexually abused by my music teacher. I was very high in MDMA at this point, and then it started all flooding back pretty quickly. And so the days and weeks after that was very difficult. I was pretty disoriented and shocked. Really sort of reoriented my whole life, and I leaned on my mom and my family and friends for support. And I started doing all this therapeutic work around talk therapy, energy breath work, acupuncture, journaling, walks in nature, the psychedelics, of course. And so all that together, sort of EMDR, which is another one. And then I saw a body worker and an intimacy coach and joined kind of a men's circle for men who had been abused in the Austin area. So all that together sort of combined the integration practice for me. And so it wasn't just about the psychedelic experiences themselves, but working to integrate them in my life, trying to make meaning out of them and what came up, and also trying to reset my body. My nervous system was very disoriented,
Yeah.
and very sort of wired. And I think the psychedelics, literally shaking out that sore trauma in my body, really helped me reset myself and sort of let go a lot of the PTSD symptoms I was dealing with at the time.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay. So when you just, what made you want to try MDMA therapy? Like, had you had experience with psychedelics, either recreationally or therapeutically before? Or was this kind of like, hey, I've literally tried everything else. Somebody told me about MDMA. Why not? Like, how did that even come into your awareness as something that you would like try next?
Yeah, so I'd heard Tim and another guy, Tucker Max, talk about their experiences, but at the time I really was not sure why I was doing it. It didn't really click. I knew I had some anxiety. I told the guide I was working with in New York that I thought my parents weren't that great. But in terms of the idea that sexual abuse would come up, that really didn't occur to me.
Yeah.
I tried MDMA a couple of times in college recreationally, but it was a very different experience therapeutically. I'd never tried any other psychedelics. I think that would have been too, stuff probably would have come up, if I'd taken high dose mushrooms or LSD. And so I never messed with any of those compounds. I was not really a drug person in college. I was more of an alcohol guy. I think psychedelics are really not my world at all, particularly growing up on the East Coast. I think there's less of a psychedelic presence there. And I grew up in a pretty culturally conservative area near Washington, D.C., and so people are kind of serious and intense there and like wear ties to work. So it wasn't like the West Coast as much, or Austin where I live now. So yeah, really not a part of my worldview until I sort of heard about this. But since then, I've done a lot of sessions the last 3 or 4 years. And they've really kind of reoriented my whole worldview. And I'm still sort of working through stuff now, but I'm in a much better place.
How so as you had mentioned, I think you said in the first like 3 or 4 sessions, like these memories kept kind of resurfacing for you. As these things were resurfacing, were you starting to feel better in your physical body? Like, would you say now, like the pelvic issues you'd been experiencing, have you healed these issues? Are you still working through these issues?
I've
Like
de-
how?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that was my question.
I've definitely made a lot of improvements around my pelvic floor. I'm still not quite where I want to be, but I'm getting close. But certainly at the beginning, things actually got worse. I think one
Mm.
misunderstanding about psychedelics is things actually tend to get worse before they tend to get better, because it's sort of like a black box, right? When you start opening the box and looking what's inside,
Mm.
all the feelings and emotions you suppressed from childhood or from other traumas, or ways you were hurt, whether that was by family or abuse situations, or all that starts coming back up if you let it after psychedelics, because they're really non-specific amplifier, and they will amplify and push up stuff from literally kind of inside you, whether that's feelings, emotions, or memories. And so to have that, it was actually very disturbing and disorienting, and I really struggled. And I even started having suicidal thoughts for a little bit after I started doing psilocybin mushrooms. But I worked through that. I worked through those feelings, and I think at this point, I still have some healing work left to do. But I'm in a much better place than I was when I started, and I'm really happy I undertook this journey most of the time. There are occasions, of course, where I sort of wish I could go back to when I was like 19 and very dissociated and but kind of less, maybe aware would be the right word, or less sort of, because I do think, bringing all this stuff up, it does change you a bit. I have gotten more diligent in certain ways. I think I always struggle with trust, but I still struggle with trust now. And I think there's like kind of an awareness to, how small I am, in the grand scheme of things, that I think was not there before psychedelics. And that sometimes that usually feels good, because I think I think by feeling that, there's like a sense of peace and sense of almost contentment when you realize, how small you are in the terms of the bigger world. But also, there's occasions where I wish I was more dissociated still.
Hey, yeah, I can relate to that. Yeah, for sure. I think that's a part of the waking up experience a little bit. You're like, man, it was easier when I was just, life felt a little simpler before I was thinking about all this stuff all the time. I
Exactly.
can, I can relate to that. I can relate to that. But also, it's like, you know, I personally believe in reincarnation. So to me, I'm like, okay, this is bettering me for the future. Like my soul is growing. These
Sure.
all these dark nights of the soul prepare us
Yeah.
for our eternal growth through time. So that's how I like to think about it.
Yeah.
Um, so you started the work with MDMA. You mentioned some psilocybin. Was that like after the MDMA, and was it also in like a ceremonial setting, or was that like solo? How did you evolve from these MDMA sessions?
Yeah, I've never done psychedelics solo. It's not really something I have any interest in doing in the near future, at least at a high dose. I microdose, of course, solo. But I did MDMA and psilocybin therapeutically with kind of trained guides, as well as a little bit of LSD and MDMA combined. That was a really good combination for me to kind of break down my ego structure. And then I've done a little bit of ayahuasca as well. And I'm still probably going to do more Aya this year. But I also tried ketamine. That did not go as well. I did it in a clinic, and it was not very therapeutic. It was more of kind of a pain protocol. And they mixed it with Ativan, which is a benzo, to kind of calm me
Oh.
down. And that really was not a good combination and was not very helpful. So I do think the way some people are doing ketamine right now is probably not that therapeutic, and sort of seems more catered towards, addiction, or I should say, it seems like people are getting addicted. And I definitely have some concerns about how it's being administered. But I do think MDMA and mushrooms in particular in therapeutic settings can really help people, and can really change lives, and can kind of help people move through childhood trauma. And I think a lot of the cultural issues we face as sort of a society, and a lot of the individual issues we face as part of a family structure, or come from childhood trauma and come from that feeling of disconnection. And psychedelics can do a great job of starting the process of reconnecting us to ourselves, to nature, to kind of a bigger, higher purpose, maybe a sense of spirituality. And so I think they're really powerful tools for healing in the right circumstances.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. How would you describe maybe the difference in your experience with MDMA versus psilocybin?
Yeah, so I think MDMA is always your friend. It can be very gentle. It's more focused on sort of trauma. It's less sort of disorienting and less spiritual. And so I think that's a really good place to start for people that are trying to kind of dip their toes in the psychedelics, because yeah, it's a great place to start. You don't lose track as much of who you are or time or things like that. Whereas, something like psilocybin or even ayahuasca can be very disorienting. There's not really a way to sort of pull the parachute, once to speak, because it's literally an hallucinogen. Things are moving. You really can lose track of sort of, I don't want to say reality or destabilization, but you can be destabilized during a session. You can sort of lose sense. And I think that's needed in a lot of cases, because I think that can help reset your kind of ego structure, reset, your thought patterns, your self-perception of yourself. And, I had a lot of self-loathing. And I think to really work through that, I need that kind of full reset, that sort of way to kind of take see things in a whole new way, so to speak, and kind of a change of perception. But it's very disorienting. It's very scary. And I think to start there is difficult for a lot of people. And so I would really recommend, if someone was trying to start their psychedelic journey, MDMA would be a great place. And then you can sort of graduate to mushrooms or, LSD or MDMA or even ayahuasca, over time. And so I think all these together, they're ultimately just tools to kind of help people, do the healing work for themselves, like within themselves. But, I really need these tools. And I think a lot of people with trauma really need the psychedelics to kind of initiate and start their healing journey. And then the idea is eventually you wouldn't need them as much. And, I have gradually scaled back my psychedelic usage, and I think I'll continue to scale back. And the idea is you can sort of get to that place, let go of trauma, feel a sense of connection and purpose without using these tools eventually.
I'm curious about the kind of the combination of the MDMA and LSD, because I've consumed those two recreationally and love the combination of those two are very sweet together, but I've never heard about them being used therapeutically. Have you done the MDMA without LSD and then done them both together? And
I have.
How does the LSD amplify or change the experience?
LSD, is very strong, and I think it doesn't have kind of the plant consciousness that mushrooms or ayahuasca has, and it's sort of just an amplifier. And I think just on its own, it can be very disorienting and very destabilizing, even compared to the other psychedelics. They call it acid for a reason, and I think it can sort of really be boundary shattering and sort of really question everything. But I think, with MDMA, the MDMA can kind of guide it a little bit. It can sort of give that intellectual bent, because MDMA is a more kind of intellectual drug. And I think those two together is a really good combination, because the LSD will open you up like all the way. Like it can really break down ego, but the MDMA, the gentleness that can come with that, the kind of trauma piece that can come with that, and sort of the intellectual piece can sort of help maybe stabilize the experience and sort of make it more therapeutic and trauma oriented, versus sort of just LSD by itself. I think can just be very dark and very sort of destabilizing and not that therapeutic. But with MDMA, I think it's really a combination.
Man, I love LSD. It's my favorite, but it's not. I'm either microdosing it or it's like for outdoor adventure and journeying or dancing or something. So I've never really like used LSD in a therapeutic setting. But I always describe the difference between LSD and mushrooms as like LSD is kind of like you're opened up and you kind of just like want to hug the whole universe. And then mushrooms, you're kind of like, I just have to go inside here and hide for a while with myself. So yeah, the heart opening properties of MDMA in combination with the LSD, I could see kind of cracking you open in any way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I had to pick one session that really sort of changed me, that would probably be one of my LSD and MDMA sessions. I almost could feel my brain change during the session. And again, there's a lot of people that don't want that, and I totally get that. Psychedelics are not for everyone. But, I was not doing very well, even at that time. And I think that really, I think I wanted that change. I needed that change because of what happened to me, and because of, frankly, how bad my abuse was in a lot of ways. And how sort of it fundamentally, I don't want to say alter my personality, but I do think it really messed me up. And so I really need strong tools to get back to who I was and to get more in touch with myself and to sort of reset myself. And that's what I got with psychedelics.
Mm. That's really, really powerful. And I'm so glad that this entered your universe so that you could set out on this journey and create your book and share this story with the world. Um, I'm curious then about the ayahuasca piece. How did, because that's like, I mean, it's such a big medicine. Like that was a leap. So I'm assuming that like you'd been working with MDMA for a while, and then you're like, hey, I'm diving in. I'm going to go sit with ayahuasca for a night, a weekend. How did that one come into your universe, and what difference or role did this play?
Yeah, I'd done over 20 sessions of MDMA, mushrooms, and LSD before I went with Aya or sat with Aya. And so I think I felt like I was ready, and I was ready. And it has been very helpful and therapeutic. But certainly, if I'd started there, it would have been a total disaster. It would have really set me back. I'm not even sure I'd be here right now because it's a very strong medicine, and I think it really would have thrown me for a loop. But I do feel like by that time, I'd sort of worked through a lot of my trauma. I'd sort of, gotten to that next level, and I felt like I was ready for Aya, and it has been very helpful for me. But so I did do it by myself with a shaman, and I think I'll continue to do it by myself or in small groups because I do still have some trauma coming up, and I did do some yelling last time that I think would not be that helpful in a large group setting. So I'm still very much in the trauma phase, although I'm slowly getting out of there. But I do think doing these big Aya groups, I don't know, that I see why that calls to certain people, but I definitely am not at a place where I want to do Aya in 15, 20, 30 people groups in South America or places like that. So that's sort of where I'm at on that.
Yeah, that's a lot. But it can feel kind of claustrophobic, or there's also just a lot of noise going on. It's kind of easy to get distracted by what others are
Absolutely.
experiencing. It makes it
Yeah.
hard to kind of be in your own universe. I was chatting with a woman yesterday who traveled to go do a 5-MeO DMT ceremony, and it was meant to be a small group, but literally at the very last minute, for whatever the reason was, whether it was a travel restriction or a family emergency, nobody else could go. It just ended up being her. So she had this entirely like private 5-MeO DMT experience at a retreat all weekend. I'm like, well, that's a perfect scenario.
Yeah.
You were kind of blessed. That
Yeah.
doesn't happen often.
I do think, I think I have done psychedelics a little bit in groups, and I see why people do it. And I think that can be really powerful. But I also think doing it individually can be really powerful, and then it can keep you in your experience, what you're seeing and feeling. And it can kind of, because I think if you integrate with too many people or sort of do the session with too many people, it can sort of become a different thing. And so
Yeah.
I do think a lot of healing is very much a solo journey. And so for me, I've always wanted to heal and then take that healing out into the world. And then kind of connect with other people in a deeper and different way versus maybe, trying to connect with people through psychedelic medicine or through working through trauma together, like in the session, so to speak. So,
Mhm.
I do think I've seen some differences in my personality, and I've made new connections outside of psychedelics because of all the healing work I've done with medicines.
And tell me a little bit more about your book. Does this kind of chronicle exactly what we're talking about right now? Like start to finish your entire journey with psychedelics?
Yeah, I focus mostly on MDMA and mushrooms because I think they have the broadest therapeutic potential and sort of they're the best places to start for people. And I think they are the two compounds that could be legalized for therapeutic use in the United States in the next 5 to 10 years. And they're also the two medicines I had the most experience with. So I really focused my journey on those two. But yeah, I was sort of around my health issues, at the beginning, how I use psychedelics to heal, a lot of it is about my abuse and sort of what happened there and sort of how that all unfolded. And then I did end up going to the police about my abuser and did write a public letter naming him and sort of what happened with that as well. I would say it's been a difficult journey with that. We'll see what happens, if anything there. But that's sort of what my book is about, and particularly integration therapy as well. Because I think integrating these experiences are really important. And so I work with the shaman and therapists, and some of the ideas around integration, around healing, and around personal growth, and all that is in the book as well. And then, also things with my parents. Obviously they did not do a great job of supporting me when I was little. And that led to a lot of issues, and we're not paying very close attention, and sort of how they dealt with my abuse and sort of different situations around there. So I would say it's about all those things together. I felt like there was not a lot of books around therapeutic use of psychedelics for healing trauma. A lot of them were kind of more about mind expansion or mystical experiences or things like that. And those absolutely have a place, but I felt like there were not a lot of personal narratives around using psychedelics to heal something like childhood sexual abuse. And then the other thing I would say is there are not very many childhood sexual abuse about males, but I do think is a big issue. Probably not as big an issue as with women, but it's sort of an untapped, maybe untapped is right, not a market that people really touch. So I think those two things together, I felt like were really important. And then another thing that I really want to emphasize is the mind-body connection. Obviously the body keeps score has really taken off, and I think that's great. But there have not been many personal narratives around the mind-body connection and having physical symptoms from trauma. I think a lot of them have focused more on like addiction or sort of substance abuse from trauma versus like physical maladies. And the last thing I'll say is I was abused in a school setting by a teacher, and I do think that's sort of an under the radar problem. People have really focused on churches and on Boy Scouts and things like that, and I absolutely think those are issues too. But far more children go to public school or go to school than do either go to either church or the Boy Scouts. And so I think this idea that and I think there could be a reckoning, and my hope is there will be sort of a reevaluation of we're sending these kids to school for 5 days, 40 hours a week with people that parents can't even identify. In a lot of cases, they have no idea who they are or where they come from, and they just sort of hand their children off, to these people in a lot of cases without any sort of vetting or. And so I think that's a really that doesn't really make sense from an evolutionary perspective. I think the family structure is really important. The immediate tribe is really important, and to bust these kids far away to go somewhere else with these kind of people that, again, a lot of them, I think most of them are really nice and amazing people, but in my experience, some weren't, and that really set me back. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who's been abused in a school situation.
No, surely not. And maybe unlike you, how many people are out there that haven't had the remembering process? So they're like dealing with all of these physical or mental or emotional issues and don't even know how to address them because they're not even sure where they originated from.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what does integration look like to you? How do you continue to integrate as you keep stacking your experiences?
Yeah, so I try to do some breath work frequently, whether that's with a shaman or whether that's in a group setting. I try to journal. I'm trying to develop a spiritual practice, although I keep fighting it. So it's sort of a gradual thing, but I am trying to think about these things in a deeper way. Definitely a ton of exercise and walking. I don't really meditate, but I find walking to be sort of meditative for me. It sort of helps me get in touch with my thoughts and feelings. I still see intimacy coach regular, but I have really scaled back my integration. And, now that we're talking about it, there are probably some other things I could still be doing because I don't feel like I'm quite done with my healing journey. But, at one point I was seeing a bunch of practitioners around EMDR and body work in a men's group and a shaman and all sorts of things like that. So I think as I've gotten in a better place, I've scaled back, but there are probably more things I could be doing at this moment.
You seem pretty committed. I feel like you're doing a lot and you have taken full responsibility of your life and your healing, Alex. That's the impression that I get.
Thank you.
And I'm so grateful for you sharing this story. And I think you're right. I think that everything you identified that we see in psychedelic education and information is missing a lot about this trauma piece, and perhaps especially around childhood trauma, and especially looking at men versus women. I do think you're right. I think it's skewed because statistically it's skewed, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be evaluating the potential all across the board.
Yeah.
So thank you for writing your book, and thank you for being here to share your story. I hope we can get it far and wide and that it finds exactly who it's meant to find. And anybody who needs to see this video will click on it and listen, and hey, reach out and snag your book if they need to take a deeper journey and help support you and yours.
Thank you. Yeah, so the book is called Trauma and Ecstasy: How Psychedelics Made My Life Worth Living. It can be found on Amazon. I think it's $4.99 on Kindle, or it will be soon. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions on Instagram, alex.l.abraham, or alex@traumaandecstasy.com. So anyway, I'm pretty easy to reach and happy to answer any questions. And I really appreciate any interest, and I'm happy to help in any way I can.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex.